Hi, and welcome to Web3 Unfiltered, the podcast where we go beyond hype to explore the systems that actually shape financial and digital infrastructure. I am your host, Collins Victory Odabi. Today's guest is Amanda Cassar, a master of financial planning and a global authority in financial abuse prevention. Amanda is the architect of the Financial Abuse Specialist Accreditation, a framework designed to identify and neutralize the ways money is used as a tool of coercion. While Web3 advocates for financial freedom, that freedom often comes with a lack of safety nets. In a world of decentralized finance, the safeguards of traditional banking disappear. Today, we'll explore the gritty reality of financial protection, estate planning in the digital age, and whether decentralized tools provide agency or merely provide room for further exploitation. Hi, Amanda. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
You're welcome, Amanda. So, first off, I'd like to ask my guests to talk about themselves and what they do. So, Amanda, what is your story? How did you get involved in what you're doing right now?
Like many financial advisors, I kind of fell into financial planning. I think when I left school, I'd never even heard of a financial advisor, and people who wanted to deal with money usually became an accountant or an economist. But I went to work for a friend of my dad's who sold insurance and retirement products. And over time in the business, I also decided to study so that I could learn more about finances for my own sake. And eventually became a financial advisor. And in 2014, I bought him out when he retired. So sort of grew the business with him from the early 90s. So sort of fell into it, but ran with it. So a lot of sweat equity built in, and then developed quite an interest in different parts of financial advice instead of just retirement and insurance. Also very interested in financial abuse and how financial advisors can help recognise and prevent that, and getting into writing some books as well. So just interested in lots of things finance.
Interesting, Amanda. You did mention financial abuse, and many people seem to underestimate the impact of financial abuse in day to day lives and globally, if I must say. So tell me, why is financial abuse often treated as such a small issue when it has such measurable impact on wealth architecture?
I think different forms of abuse seem to get the headlines. I think the Me Too movement a few years ago, really shone the spotlight on sexual abuse. Domestic violence seems also to focus on the emotional and physical abuse, whereas one of the easiest ways to control someone is actually financial. And they've done a study in the United States that shows that in 99% of domestic violence cases, financial abuse is part of the pattern of abuse. So it's rarely a standalone one-off style of abuse, but it is sort of packaged in with emotional and physical. And for older people, even neglect has a part to play. So it's probably the poor cousin of the other forms of abuse that get a bit more, you can see someone who's got a black eye or a broken arm. You can't see usually if someone, is only getting a few dollars a week pocket money to, that's supposed to be for the groceries or that sort of thing. It's a much easier to hide form of abuse. So that's probably why it's not as discussed as often.
What an eye opener, Amanda. You have seen up close how money can be used as a weapon. So tell us, what are the red flags that advisors and family offices consistently miss?
Well, financial abuse comes under what's usually called coercive control. So it could be limiting access to funds for basic needs, from medication to groceries. There's even a term called period poverty, where partners won't allow access to sanitary items for women during menstruation. Letting children have books for school, So it's about not providing life's necessities and controlling people and their access to finances to be able to live their lives. It also can cover things like refusing to allow people to study to get ahead, forcing people to work in a family business for little or no money, and not being free to pursue interests that you'd like, by not allowing, access to the finance to learn more about them. So it sort of covers a lot of areas. In elder financial abuse, it can be the stealing of paperwork, taking of funds anywhere from the night table to, not using a power of attorney properly and stealing funds from banks and credit cards and term deposits. So it covers a lot of ground, financial and economic abuse.
Interesting, Amanda. In addition to what you've just described, can you shed more light on the agency gap that leads to financial abuse in traditional wealth management?
Yeah, so it can be, not allowing people to get their medications, even, putting them on a very limited, here's $100, you have to feed a family of 5 on that for a week. So, and it differs in different countries and communities, how it actually looks. So what some people might just call, a very patriarchal society where, the men have traditionally been the breadwinners, gone to work, and, the wife minds the children and, assists on the home front, that, she would have access to be able to dress the children and, make enough to, or have enough from the husband to be able to provide easily. But if, you have to beg for new pairs of shoes or clothes or, enough to make ends meet, then it doesn't seem to be that it's a working together jointly towards goals. And I think it's the intention behind what the abuse is. It may be that most families, there is someone who takes the lead with money or is more comfortable with money or is better at handling money, and that's fairly normal. But when you're doing it to impact or hurt the other person and not working together towards joint family goals, I think that's when we can have a look at what's that gap and what's the intention behind it. Is your intention to hurt or harm the other person, or is it, that you're helping out so that you can achieve what you'd like to together?
The way you articulated that so precisely well is absolutely brilliant, Amanda. Let's talk about durable financial systems. I believe you're an expert in estate management and succession. How do you establish or build financial systems that are resilient enough to survive family conflicts?
To survive conflict?
Yes.
Good question. Some people just thrive on conflict, and no matter what you do, you're going to hit conflict anyway. But resilient financial systems, I think, are when two people have really good open levels of communication amongst themselves, especially couples, where you have some autonomy, even if that means you both keep your own bank accounts when you're working, and come together. You discuss your goals. You discuss what money looked like in your families when you were growing up. Did you hear things like money doesn't grow on trees, or it takes money to make money? And, do you still believe some of those things that you heard growing up? Have you ever stopped to think, actually, do I believe that? Is that true? Does that belief serve me? Is there something else I could swap that with? So I think questioning our own views on money first, examining the stories we've been told, because usually they become our stories too without us even questioning them. So to try and avoid conflict in, partnerships, I think having chats about, what was money like in your house growing up? Did mum and dad both work? Was mum a stay-at-home mum? Did dad provide well? What were the stories that you heard? And, you've often got a saver and a spender, and that can create huge problems in partnerships where one's spending all the other money and the other one wants to save it. And that creates the conflict of resentment or anger in a relationship. So I think these really open communication channels are really important, because it's going to be a part of everything you do going forward, from where you live, putting food on the table, the lifestyle, you'd like to share, whether you can or can't afford children. So it takes a part of everything we do. And, we might sit down and have a chat with our partner and go, do you want kids? Yes or no? All right, well, let's get married. We both want kids. That makes sense. Whereas these really big life-changing discussions, they're just sort of hidden because it's always been, we don't talk about money or politics or religion or what the, the big issues are. They're all taboo. And it just makes it really difficult later on when you find you've got these fundamentally different beliefs and you're trying to come together and create a life and they don't match. So I think open communication and a little bit of self-awareness and having a really good examine of those stories that we've heard or we repeat really easily is a great way to just start thinking about money and, what did our parents teach us? What, now that we've gone out into the world and have a job and need to start creating our own living, what do we wish we'd learned? What would we like our kids to learn that we never learned? So, they're not little questions to ponder. They do take time to, we might not have even thought, what do I think about money? We might have a terrible relationship with money. We're frightened of it. We don't know how to control it, so it controls us. That they're all very difficult questions to answer and take time out to think about. So, yeah, it does take a bit of time to understand our own relationship with money before we can start criticising and making accusations about other people's beliefs as well.
I believe this conversation should even be had before friendships even begin. Talk more of relationships that lead to marriage or, well, something more.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be a really, really early one on the table. But like I said, it's a taboo subject. So most people, it doesn't crop up a lot of the time. So, and for some people, it's a really difficult thing to go, I want to have a discussion about this. And for other people, it's like, I think, let's get this open and out into the air and have it. So it depends on our own personality type and our relationship with money about how easy it is to have those conversations or difficult.
You're absolutely right, Amanda. It does depend on the personality type. Now, still on building durable financial systems, what would you describe as the ethical investing fallacy? And how can builders ensure that their capital is actually performing without compromising on structural integrity?
Yeah, so ethical investing, in some places it's called ESG investing. I think, again, we have to sit down and ask those questions of ourselves. What's important to me? And for some people, it's just, I just want to go into an index fund that covers everything and I know my money, will follow the index over time. Whereas other people might be more, I don't want to have anything involved in slave labour. I don't want anything with child trafficking. I don't want anything with guns. And yet I had this discussion with one of my clients and he went, look, I absolutely don't want anything to do with coal mines. And I said, well, I noticed you've got some BHP shares in your portfolio. And he said, well, you're not touching my BHP shares. So BHP themselves don't have coal mines, but they had two subsidiary companies that did have some coal mines. So, it's a very interesting conversation to have with people. And it doesn't just have to be our investment portfolio. We invest money every time we buy a new item of clothing. We might go onto the super cheap global websites that are available now. And, I just want a $5 t-shirt because I can't afford anything else versus, well, is that being made by slave labour? Is that, not, fast fashion and it's wasting water and resources? So investing doesn't just have to be where I put my savings. It's where am I going to spend my money as well? So there's ethical considerations basically every time we spend. So it's that interesting conversation to have going, have I ever even thought about, if I put my money with this company to buy goods, what am I supporting? So it's not just a case of I want to build up a share portfolio and, does this ETF invest in tobacco or guns? It's a much bigger discussion than that. So again, having those questions, and I'm happy to share a questionnaire I've got with you and your listeners about how they can have a look at and a think about what really matters to them. Because one person, it might just be absolutely, look, tobacco's the worst thing in the world and I don't want to have anything to do with that. So as long as I don't have cigarette companies, I'm fine. Whereas other people want their investments to be doing good. They want social impact to come out of them. So again, we're all very different. We're driven by different things. It might be, look, my budget doesn't allow me to make those decisions. I just have to find the cheapest thing and that's how it goes. But it's being aware, I think, of at least in the first place, and making the decision regardless. It's still your choice to make. But again, questioning things that we don't ordinarily question, whether it's where we spend $1 or invest $1. So yeah, there's some interesting issues that arise with ethical investing as well.
For the questionnaire you talked about, kindly drop it in this chat section if it has a link, and I'll be sure to add it to the show notes and description of the episode. Okay, so I remember you worked in Uganda and Malawi, and yes, your work there highlights vision, commitment, and passion. Tell me, Amanda, how does the reality of emerging markets challenge the comfortable assumptions of Western financial planning?
If anything, it's a great big dose of perspective, to see people who are struggling to make ends meet on less than $1 a day or $2 a day. There's some issues they don't have to worry about because, they're not going to be investing. But again, every dollar they spend does matter. So, is it going to go on school supplies? And I think it was also just very human to know that we've all got the same worries. We worry about our children and their education and, how am I going to make ends meet? So it sort of humanised everything for me, but gave me that beautiful hope of, the people we met in the villages who were being helped by the Hunger Project, they've been involved in intergenerational poverty. It was the same for their parents and their grandparents. And you can either have the mentality of, it's the government's job to save me, it's the elders in the village job to save me, it's aid agencies should come along and save me and give me handouts, versus if it's going to be, it's up to me. And how can I, in my own little way, improve my little, life for my family, my community, my village? And those that had done it and accepted the hand up rather than the hand out, accepted a little microfinance loan and learned how to, get more from their crops, or to, grow their little pig or chicken farm to be able to help others. It was just so beautiful to see the pride in people's faces when, they were the ones who'd stepped up and made changes. So I think that beautiful dose of perspective that regardless of our circumstances, we say very flippantly first world problems, in the developed world, not often understanding or having much of a scope of what, third world problems might be, except in I saw starving kids in Africa on TV once. So it's a beautiful way of, coming back to reality and working out what's really important, because we're just so overwhelmed in the Western world with stuff and consumerism and getting the next thing, whereas, experiences and family are what really matter across everything. So I think that beautiful dose of perspective for me was just such a great learning and lesson to take away from Malawi and Uganda, and that, these people are survivors. They're just amazing and do what they can to look after their loved ones.
You are right, they are survivors, and it's a really sad thing to hear about the hunger in Uganda, Malawi, and some African countries. Well, Amanda, there was something you said that made me remember your hinterland hideaway where you have fun with your chickens. Okay, so how do you balance the need for privacy and hinterland hideaway security with the transparency required for professional financial planning or financial management?
I think it's just part of who I am. I love my little house on the hill with my chickens in the backyard. I think for me, something very grounding. I live on a beautiful part of the world called the Gold Coast. So, there's a beautiful mountain up the road from me 20 minutes away where I can hike, and there's beautiful beaches 20 minutes away from me where I can, spend some time as well. So I think being able to spend some time on our own, ask those questions and still be able to, be free for our clients and share our knowledge and, want to give back to our communities is really important to me. So finding that balance makes a lot of sense for me.
Oh, wow, interesting. You did mention something about the Himalayas, where I believe you picked up one or two things about leadership. So tell us, how did the leadership dynamics you observed in the Himalayas translate into managing a tech-forward family business?
That was another project with the Hunger Project where I had worked with some ladies in India, and it's quite a different system to the one used in Uganda and Malawi, because in India they have quota systems for local government, and love them or hate them, the quota systems, they allow people from what were formerly the different castes or stratas of society in India to be part of local council. And a lot of those women were illiterate, they were uneducated, they'd never had a voice outside, their family home or community. And, they've been thrust into these roles where they thought they would fail in local government. So the Hunger Project was doing an educational service where these women could step up and work out, what were the big deals in their communities? Was it getting their daughters safely to and from school? Was it having sanitation in their villages? Was it making sure there was food available for those who were struggling? Was it making sure the widows in the community got the government pensions that they may not have even known they were entitled to? So these women, were put into positions where they could make a difference. And again, to watch them run with it and improve and serve their communities was incredibly beautiful to see. So again, the lessons for me about stepping up and leadership were just brilliant.
That must have been very inspiring. Thank you for sharing that story with us. I would like us to come back to Web3 aligned discussion or session, because this is Web3 Unfiltered and we have a wide range of audience, from builders to families to operators and, well, a whole lot. So talking about decentralization in Web3, do you think that decentralization actually empowers victims of financial abuse, or does it remove the remaining institutional eyes that could spot currency control?
I think the institutions are becoming a lot more aware of their part to play. I know banking in Australia and the UK, they are training their staff on frontline now to be much more aware of when people are being coerced or pressured into making withdrawals. But obviously, with electronic banking now, if someone gets a hold of a password or a card, it makes it much easier to scam or extort that person. So I think if you're going to find a way of hurting somebody else financially, that decentralisation probably isn't going to make too much of a difference, because it comes down to the individual. I just hope more and more of the banks and that develop policies and, take a part in stopping it.
I am curious about what kind of training the banks are giving their staff. I think I'll do some digging into it just for personal knowledge. Now, talking about banks,
Web3 champions the idea of becoming your own bank through self-custody. However, in traditional finance, unwinding a fraudulent transaction is a primary safeguard against abuse. Yeah. So how can your frameworks for financial protection survive in a Web3 environment where transactions are immutable and there is no manager to call?
Well, the buck stops with you at the end of the day. If you are your own bank, it's whether you're, I suppose, being controlled at an individual level and how that would look and work. Obviously, when you've got, a banking system behind you and you can ring up that hotline and just, let them know that it was a fraudulent transaction, often you will get most or all of the money back fairly quickly. You've got the ability to stop your card. When there's someone within your, home usually who's doing the controlling, that's a lot more difficult. So There are some banks I know that do have what they call hidden accounts, where there's absolutely no paperwork passed on, and you do need to go into the account and the branch to make decisions. If you're just carrying cash alone rather than doing anything online, you're talking about an unregulated market, so that's why you don't have the protections, of a standard market. But, it comes with its own downfalls as well to be a regulated market. So, there's pros and cons in every situation, and just, making sure that you're aware of what you're getting into with it and that you understand it. I think a lot of people jump into it without fully understanding, or, some mate or a taxi driver's given them a hot tip on what to do and what you should do and shouldn't do. So don't do anything you don't understand. I think that makes life very difficult to try and unwind things if you don't understand what you signed up for in the first place. So doing a lot of research before you go into them is a bright idea.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Lastly, before we go, what is one lesson from traditional financial planning that most business owners and founders are dangerously ignoring right now?
I think business planning, when you have a partner, is super vital, and most people don't do it well. They sort of, a couple of mates who get together and think they've got a bright idea and go from there without perhaps meeting the people who can help them set up what happens if someone gets sick, what happens if, they face financial adversity and the temptation is to take from the company to cover setbacks, what happens if they're totally disabled and can't give to the company anymore. So making allowances for what could possibly go wrong is one of the best ways, I think, to prevent abuse and drama between business partners. Be prepared, as the Scouts say.
Always be prepared. Well, that is one thing that I've always held on to for a very, very long time. Thank you so much, Amanda, for the stories and insights you've shared with us today. What final notes? Do you have any final notes for our listeners before we wrap up this episode?
No, I think when it comes to finances, just understanding your numbers. What does it cost you every day to wake up and breathe and live with all your expenses? And just be on top of that. Understand, per pay period, what it costs you to live. And then, each time whether, you can direct money to debt or investments or savings or what's best for you. So I know it's boring, but it's the best way to be on top of your own money.
Thank you so very much, Amanda.
Thanks, Cole. Talk soon.
All right, so that wraps up today's episode of Web3 Unfiltered. A big thank you to Amanda Cassar for sharing the unfiltered truth about finance and financial abuse, and also how one can be protected against financial abuse. If you found this episode valuable, make sure to share with your network and subscribe to Web3 Unfiltered so you never miss an insight. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep building.